In a quiet neighborhood, summer afternoons meant laughter, chalk drawings, and children running through sprinklers until two officers decided otherwise. To them, a 6-year-old black girl standing barefoot in the grass was no more than a mouthy child needing discipline. They saw her as small, defenseless, an easy target for humiliation. So they mocked her, then poured a bucket of cold water over her head, believing they'd silenced her spirit. What they didn't know was that her father was the director of the FBI, a man who built his life dismantling abuse of power. Their lesson had just lit a fire. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The summer sun beat down on Harbor Heights, turning the sidewalks into shimmering ribbons of heat. On her weathered front porch, Grandma Lila settled into her favorite wooden rocker, its familiar creak keeping time with the children's laughter. Her watchful eyes never strayed far from 6-year-old Amara, who lay sprawled on her belly on the concrete, surrounded by a rainbow of chalk pieces. "Look, Grandma!" Amara called out, pointing to her latest masterpiece, a detailed drawing of their house with stick figures of herself and Grandma Lila standing hand in hand. "That's us having a picnic in the front yard." "It's beautiful, baby," Grandma Lila smiled, adjusting her thin cotton blouse against the heat. The air was thick with the sounds of summer, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the happy shrieks of neighborhood kids playing next door. In the Martinez family's yard, several children gathered around a garden hose, taking turns spraying each other and jumping through the refreshing arc of water. Their joyful squeals echoed down the street as they dodged and weaved, their clothes already soaked through. "Marcus, it's your turn," 8-year-old Deja called out, handing the hose to a smaller boy who could barely contain his excitement. The peaceful scene shattered at the sound of tires crunching on asphalt. A police cruiser rolled to a stop, its white paint gleaming in the harsh sunlight. Officers Kincaid and Mays stepped out, their boots scraping against the pavement as they approached the Martinez yard. "Hey!" Officer Kincaid's voice boomed across the yard. "What do you think you're doing with that hose?" The children froze. Marcus stood paralyzed, the hose still running in his trembling hands, water pooling at his feet. Officer Mays planted her hands on her hips. "That's city water you're wasting. Being real reckless there, aren't you, boy?" Amara's chalk clattered to the sidewalk as she pushed herself up. Her small fists clenched at her sides as she watched Marcus's lower lip begin to quiver. "Look at this mess," Kincaid continued, gesturing at the wet grass and sidewalk. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we're tired of seeing in this neighborhood." "Amara," Grandma Lila called softly from the porch, recognizing the determined set of her granddaughter's shoulders. But Amara was already moving, her sandals slapping against the wet concrete as she marched toward the officers. "He's not bad. He's just playing," Amara declared, her voice clear and strong despite her small stature. "You're the bullies." Officer Kincaid's head snapped toward her, his face darkening. "Excuse me." He took a step closer, towering over her. "Little girl, you better watch your mouth. Show some respect when you're talking to an officer." Amara didn't back down. Instead, she planted her feet firmly, like she'd seen her father do when making important points at dinner. "Respect is earned," she said, echoing words she'd heard at home. "And you're being mean for no reason." Officer Mays let out a harsh laugh. "Listen to this one, Brent. Thinks she can lecture us about respect." The other children had gathered behind Amara now, their eyes wide but their presence steady. Marcus still held the hose, though he'd pointed it at the ground. "I said, show some respect," Kincaid growled, his hand resting meaningfully on his belt. Amara's response was pure 6-year-old defiance. She stuck out her tongue, and in one quick motion stomped her foot in a puddle, sending a spray of water onto Kincaid's polished shoes. For a moment, everything went still. Then the children burst into laughter. Nervous at first, then genuine as they saw the dark spots spreading across the officer's shoes and pant cuffs. Officer Kincaid's face turned a deep shade of red. His fingers twitched near his belt as he glared down at his wet shoes, then at Amara's unflinching face. Behind him, Officer Mays's lips curved into a mean smile. "Think that's funny, do you?" Kincaid's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Think it's cute to disrespect an officer of the law?" The children's laughter continued, though softer now, mixed with whispers and giggles they tried to suppress. A young girl snorted, setting off another round of muffled snickers. Grandma Lila's rocker creaked as she stood, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding in her neighbor's yard. She moved carefully down the porch steps, her arthritis forgotten in her concern for Amara. Officer Kincaid's jaw clenched as another wave of giggles rippled through the group of children. His face grew even redder, his embarrassment visible in the tight set of his shoulders and the way his right hand kept clenching and unclenching. "You think this is a joke?" he spat out, his voice rising with each word. The laughter died down, but the damage to his ego was already done. The children had seen him made small, and no amount of intimidation could erase that moment. The summer air grew heavy with tension as Kincaid stood there, his wet shoes squeaking slightly when he shifted his weight. The children's earlier joy had transformed into something electric and dangerous. The knowledge that they had witnessed an authority figure's humiliation, and that there would be consequences. Officer Mays's eyes darted to the curb where the Martinez family had left their car washing supplies earlier that day. A large blue bucket, still half full of water, sat beside a pile of sponges and rags. Her lips curled into a cruel smile as she nudged Kincaid with her elbow. "You know what they say about disrespectful children," she drawled, stepping toward the bucket. "Sometimes they need a good cooling off." The other children began backing away, their earlier bravery dissolving as they sensed the shift in atmosphere. Marcus dropped the hose, the water still trickling onto the grass, and retreated behind his older sister. "Don't you dare!" Grandma Lila called out, her voice trembling with anger as she made her way across the yard. But she was still too far away, her steps slowed by age and arthritis. Mays hefted the bucket, water sloshing over the sides. "Let's see how smart that mouth is after this," she said, advancing on Amara. Amara stood rooted to the spot, her eyes widening as she realized what was about to happen. She opened her mouth to speak, but before any words could come out, Officer Mays upended the bucket over her head. The shock of the cold water hit Amara like a physical blow. She gasped, her small body shuddering as the icy water cascaded over her, soaking her from head to toe. Her pink cotton dress, decorated with tiny butterflies, instantly clung to her small frame. Water streamed from her braids, running down her face in rivulets. Gasps and cries of dismay erupted from the porches where neighbors had gathered to watch. Mrs. Rodriguez covered her mouth in horror. Mr. Jenkins half rose from his chair, his newspaper forgotten in his lap. "Now you'll remember your manners," Kincaid sneered, satisfaction evident in his voice as he watched Amara stand there, dripping and shivering despite the summer heat. The first sob caught in Amara's throat, more from shock than pain. Then another followed, and another, until she was crying in earnest, her small shoulders shaking as she stood in a growing puddle of water. "Baby!" Grandma Lila called out, finally reaching her granddaughter. She pulled Amara close, not caring that her own clothes were getting soaked. "How dare you!" she shouted at the officers, her voice carrying the weight of decades of witnessed injustices. "She's just a child." "She's old enough to learn respect," Mays replied, dropping the empty bucket with a clatter. "Maybe next time she'll think twice before acting up." Acting up? Grandma Lila's voice rose, even as her hands shook while trying to wipe water from Amara's face. She was defending a friend from your bullying. What kind of people are you, treating a 6-year-old like this? Kincaid took a threatening step forward. Ma'am, you need to watch your tone. We can cite you for interfering with police business. Police business? A new voice boomed across the yard. Is that what you call assaulting a child? Mr. Howard, the neighborhood block supervisor, strode toward them, his face tight with anger. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair, and his official Parks Department uniform seemed to lend weight to his authority. Back off, both of you, he ordered the officers, positioning himself between them and Grandma Lila, who was still trying to comfort a sobbing Amara. This doesn't concern you, Mays started, but Mr. Howard cut her off. Like hell it doesn't. This happened in my jurisdiction, and I saw the whole thing from my office window. He pulled out his phone, already typing. Badge numbers. Now. You're overstepping, Kincaid warned, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. No, you overstepped when you decided to terrorize children in my neighborhood, Mr. Howard replied firmly. He turned to Grandma Lila, his voice softening. Mrs. Dorsey, I'm filing a report right now. This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable. Hope flickered across Grandma Lila's face as she held Amara closer. The little girl's sobs had quieted to hiccups, but she was still trembling. I'll make sure this goes straight to their superiors, Mr. Howard promised, his fingers moving quickly across his phone screen. We have witnesses, and I've been recording since I came outside. The other children had clustered around Amara now, offering quiet words of comfort. Marcus brought over a clean towel from his family's car washing supplies, and Deja helped wrap it around Amara's shoulders. You're making a mistake, Officer Mays said, but her earlier smugness had faded. The only mistake here was yours, Mr. Howard replied, without looking up from his phone. Now, unless you have actual police business here, I suggest you leave. Your presence is no longer needed or wanted. The officers exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Finally, Kincaid jerked his head toward their cruiser. They retreated, their boots squelching through the wet grass, but not before Kincaid threw one last dark look over his shoulder. The sound of their car doors slamming echoed through the suddenly quiet street. As their cruiser pulled away, Mr. Howard placed a gentle hand on Grandma Lila's shoulder. I'll file a report myself, Mrs. Dorsey, he assured her. This won't be swept under the rug. I promise you that. That evening, the setting sun cast long shadows through Grandma Lila's living room windows. Amara sat curled up on the worn floral couch, wrapped in her favorite purple blanket, her hands cupped around a mug of hot cocoa topped with tiny marshmallows. Though hours had passed since the incident, her braids were still slightly damp, and she'd changed into her emergency sleepover pajamas that she kept at her grandmother's house. Take another sip, baby, Grandma Lila encouraged, settling beside her with her own mug of tea. The familiar scent of chamomile filled the air, mixing with the sweet chocolate aroma. It'll warm you up from the inside out. Amara took a careful sip, leaving a small chocolate mustache that her grandmother gently wiped away with a tissue. Mr. Howard seemed really mad at those officers, she said quietly, her voice still a bit shaky. He sure was, Grandma Lila agreed, adjusting the blanket around Amara's shoulders. And he's right to be. What they did was wrong, plain and simple. Mr. Howard's going to make sure their bosses know exactly what happened. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background as Amara considered this. Will they get in trouble? She asked, her small fingers tracing the rim of her mug. They should, Grandma Lila said firmly. Mr. Howard's been our block supervisor for 15 years. When he files a report, people listen. He doesn't let things slide, especially not when it comes to protecting our neighborhood kids. Outside, crickets began their evening chorus, as darkness settled over the street. Through the window, they could see porch lights clicking on, one by one, like stars appearing in the night sky. The Martinez family was still outside, putting away the last of their car-washing supplies, speaking in hushed, angry tones about what they'd witnessed. "I just wanted to help Marcus," Amara said, her voice small. "They were being mean to him for no reason." Grandma Lila wrapped an arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. "You were being brave, standing up for your friend. That's never wrong, even if some people don't like it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their drinks and listening to the neighborhood settling down for the night. The familiar creaks of Grandma Lila's old house, the distant sound of a train whistle, the gentle whir of the ceiling fan, all helped create a cocoon of safety around them. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Amara was still asleep upstairs in her special room at Grandma's house when Lila heard the mail truck's familiar rumble. She stepped out onto her porch, breathing in the fresh morning air, and retrieved the small stack of envelopes from her mailbox. Back in her sunny kitchen, she sorted through the usual mix of bills and advertisements until she came to an official-looking envelope from the Harbor Heights Police Department. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, a sense of dread building in her stomach. The citation inside was printed on harsh yellow paper, the official seal of the department stamped at the top. As she read the formal language, her coffee grew cold beside her, forgotten. Notice of citation: interference with police officers. During official duties, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. During a routine community patrol on Saturday, June 15th, Lila Dorsey did willfully obstruct and interfere with officers performing their lawful duties during a neighborhood disturbance. The words blurred before her eyes as she continued reading. The fine amount at the bottom of the page made her sink heavily into her kitchen chair. Below the citation was a separate sheet, a copy of what was supposed to be Mr. Howard's formal complaint. Instead of the detailed account she expected, there was only a brief community note stating that a minor verbal disagreement had occurred between officers and residents, with no mention of the water incident or Amara at all. The morning sunshine streaming through her kitchen window suddenly felt less warm. The cheerful yellow curtains she'd hung last spring seemed to mock the harshness of the citation in her hands. Outside, she could hear children already playing, their laughter carrying across the morning air, but it didn't lift her spirits as it usually did. The creak of floorboards announced Amara's presence before she appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wrapped in her blanket from the night before. Her hair was mussed from sleep, and she rubbed her eyes as she padded across the linoleum floor in her sock feet. "Morning, Grandma," she yawned, but then stopped short when she saw her grandmother's expression. "What's wrong?" Lila tried to hide the citation, but Amara had already spotted the official letterhead. She was a quick reader for her age, and her eyes widened as she recognized the police department's logo. "What's that paper?" Amara asked, coming closer. She peered at the yellow sheet, her face scrunching up as she tried to make sense of the adult words. Grandma Lila's hand shook as she set the citation down on the table. How could she explain this to a 6-year-old? How could she make sense of a system that would punish her for protecting her granddaughter? Amara's small finger traced the police department seal at the top of the page. Her voice was quiet but clear when she asked, "Why are they saying you did something bad, Grandma?" The afternoon sun hung low in the sky when a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of Grandma Lila's house. Malcolm Dorsey stepped out, his navy suit crisp despite the summer heat. His movements were deliberate and controlled as he made his way up the worn path to Lila's front porch. Lila opened the door before he could knock. "Malcolm?" she said softly, her usual warm smile replaced by worry lines around her eyes. "Thank you for coming." "Where's Amara's backpack?" he asked, his voice steady but tight. Even in casual conversation, Malcolm carried himself with the careful precision of someone used to weighing every word. "In the kitchen," Lila replied, leading him inside. "Still damp, I'm afraid." "I didn't want to put it in the dryer and risk ruining her school things." The pink backpack sat in a puddle on Lila's kitchen floor, water still occasionally dripping from its saturated fabric. Malcolm picked it up, water seeping into his perfectly pressed sleeve. His jaw clenched slightly, the only visible sign of his anger. "Tell me everything," he said, pulling out a kitchen chair and sitting down. His posture remained straight, but his eyes softened as Amara came running in from the living room. "Daddy!" she called out, throwing herself into his arms. Despite his formal suit, Malcolm gathered her close, one hand gently touching her still damp braids. "Hi, sweetheart," he murmured. "Grandma tells me you had a rough day." Lila settled across from them, the yellow citation paper placed carefully on the table between them. As she recounted the morning's events, Malcolm's expression remained neutral, but his hand tightened slightly on Amara's shoulder each time Lila described the officer's actions. "They dumped water on her, Malcolm," Lila's voice cracked. "Cold water from a dirty bucket, right there in front of everyone, like she was nothing. And now, this citation." She pushed the paper toward him. Malcolm read it slowly, his eyes moving methodically across each line. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, a group of kids rode past on their bikes, their cheerful voices floating through the window like a reminder of how childhood should be, carefree and unafraid. "Did I do something wrong, Daddy?" Amara asked quietly, her small fingers playing with his tie. "The officers said I was disrespectful." Malcolm set the citation down and turned Amara to face him fully. "No, baby. You weren't wrong. You saw someone being treated unfairly, and you spoke up. That takes courage. But they made Grandma get in trouble." Amara's lower lip trembled. "Because of me. This isn't your fault," Malcolm said firmly. He reached into his inner suit pocket and removed his credentials, placing them on the table next to the citation. The FBI director's badge gleamed in the afternoon light. Lila's eyes widened. Though she knew Malcolm worked for the FBI, she hadn't realized the extent of his position. "Malcolm!" "I could make this go away with one phone call," he said quietly, his finger tracing the edge of his badge. "I could have those officers transferred to the coldest, most remote station in Alaska by morning." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle whir of the ceiling fan. Even Amara seemed to sense the weight of the moment, sitting still in her father's lap. "But that's not how we're going to handle this," Malcolm continued, his voice taking on the measured tone he used in federal briefings. "We're going to do this right, by the book, because that's how real change happens." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and began writing with precise strokes. "We'll document everything: the initial confrontation, the water incident, the retaliatory citation, the altered supervisor's report. We'll build a case that can't be buried or explained away." "What about the other families?" Lila asked. "This isn't the first time those officers have thrown their weight around at the park." "We'll gather those stories too," Malcolm nodded. "Every incident, every complaint, every pattern of behavior. We'll expose not just these two officers, but the system that protects them." Amara watched her father write, her small face serious. "Will they be mad at us?" Malcolm set his pen down and turned her face toward his. "They might be, sweetheart. Standing up to bullies isn't easy, but you've already shown more courage than those officers ever have. We're going to make sure they learn that badges don't give them the right to hurt people." The afternoon light was fading when Malcolm finally stood, Amara's damp backpack in one hand, his daughter's small hand in the other. "I'll have someone from the Civil Rights Division contact you tomorrow, Mama Lila," he said. "Don't worry about that citation. We'll handle it legally." Lila walked them to the door, hugging Amara tight before they left. "You're sure about doing this the slow way?" she asked Malcolm quietly. "It's the right way," he replied, his voice firm. They expect anger. They expect retaliation. What they don't expect is patience and procedure. We'll show them what real justice looks like. Later that night, in Amara's bedroom, Malcolm tucked his daughter into bed. Her room was a child's sanctuary, with twinkling fairy lights strung across the ceiling and well-loved stuffed animals standing guard on her shelves. He smoothed her favorite unicorn blanket, making sure she was cozy and warm. "Daddy?" Amara's voice was sleepy. "Are you mad at me for making trouble?" Malcolm leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You didn't make trouble, baby. You shined a light on it, and I'm so proud of you for that." He adjusted her nightlight and moved toward the door. "This is not over," he whispered, watching his daughter's eyes close as sleep finally claimed her. Monday morning arrived with the crisp energy that always filled the J. Edgar Hoover building. Malcolm Dorsey's shoes clicked against the polished floor as he made his way through the familiar corridors, nodding to agents who stepped aside respectfully. His face betrayed nothing of the storm brewing inside him. In his office, Malcolm carefully arranged the documentation on his desk. The citation issued to his mother-in-law lay beside photographs of Amara's water-soaked clothes and sworn statements from witnesses at the park. His assistant had already prepared the formal request for a pattern or practice investigation, the pages waiting for his signature like soldiers ready for battle. "Send in Deputy Director Chen," Malcolm spoke into his intercom, his voice steady. While waiting, he straightened his tie and checked that every document was perfectly aligned. Control and precision. These were his weapons now. Sarah Chen entered, her sharp eyes taking in the unusual array of papers on her boss's typically pristine desk. "Director Dorsey?" "Have a seat, Sarah." Malcolm gestured to the chair across from him. "I'm initiating a formal civil rights investigation into the Harbor Heights Police Department." He slid the main document toward her. "And I'm recusing myself immediately." Chen's eyebrows rose slightly as she scanned the first page. "This involves your daughter." "Yes." Malcolm's fingers drummed once on his desk, his only tell. "Which is why I'm stepping back. I want Special Counsel Williams to lead this. He's handled similar cases in Baltimore and Cleveland. The police union will fight this," Chen warned, though her tone was supportive. "Gus Randall has friends in Congress." "Let them fight," Malcolm replied, signing the final authorization with his characteristic precise strokes. "We'll do this by the book. Every I dotted, every AT crossed. They can't bury the truth if we don't give them any shadows to hide in." Across town at the Harbor Heights Police Precinct, Sergeant Doyle's office hummed with activity. His fingers flew across his keyboard, adjusting the language in the incident reports from Saturday. Defiant juvenile subject demonstrated aggressive behavior, he muttered, pausing to sip his coffee. Subject's guardian encouraged confrontational stance. Officer Mays leaned against his doorframe, arms crossed. "You really think they'll come after us over some kid getting wet?" "They're already coming," Doyle replied without looking up. "But they'll find nothing but professional responses to an escalating situation." He saved the modified report with a satisfied click. The heavy tread of boots announced Gus Randall's arrival before he appeared in the doorway, his bulk forcing Mays to step aside. The union boss's face was flushed with anger. His phone clutched tight in his meaty hand. "Just got word from our friends at Justice," Randall growled, closing Doyle's office door. "They're launching a pattern or practice investigation." Over a splash of water. His fist came down on Doyle's desk, rattling the coffee mug. "We knew this was coming," Doyle said calmly, turning his monitor so Randall could see the revised reports. "Everything's documented properly now. Professional responses only." Randall's eyes narrowed as he scanned the screen. "Good. But we need more. Get statements from other officers about this kid's attitude problem. Create a pattern of our own." "Already on it," Mays smirked. I've got 3 officers ready to testify about previous incidents of disrespect. Perfect. Randall straightened his union president's pin. We'll bury them in paperwork. Make it look like we're the victims of a vendetta. He gathered the officers closer, his voice dropping. We'll crush this nonsense before it spreads. Nobody comes after our own. Back at FBI headquarters, Special Counsel Williams was already assembling his team. Boxes of records began arriving from Harbor Heights. Personnel files, complaint histories, use of force reports. Young analysts huddled over computers, building timelines and tracking patterns. Malcolm walked past the conference room they'd commandeered, resisting the urge to peek in. He'd meant what he said about recusal. This had to be clean, untouchable. His phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Amara asking for you. Can you come by? The sun was setting when Malcolm pulled up to Lila's house. Through the window he could see Amara curled up on the couch, her favorite blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked so small, so innocent, yet she'd sparked something that could change an entire system. Lila met him at the door. She's been quiet today, she whispered, worried about going back to school tomorrow. Malcolm found Amara half asleep on the couch, her math homework scattered around her. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly, sitting beside her. Rough day? Tommy at school said his dad's a police officer, Amara mumbled, snuggling closer to her father. He said I got his dad in trouble. Malcolm's heart tightened, but his voice remained gentle. You didn't get anyone in trouble, Amara. The officers made their own choices that day. Now they have to answer for those choices. Like when I have to go to the principal's office if I do something wrong. Something like that. Malcolm smiled slightly. Except, this is about making sure they learn to treat everyone fairly, not just some people. Amara's eyes were growing heavy. Malcolm gathered her homework, stacking it neatly on the coffee table. Time for bed, I think. Will you stay until I fall asleep? She asked, her voice already drowsy. Of course. Malcolm helped her up, guiding her toward her bedroom at Lila's house. Once she was tucked in, he sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The weight of the day, of all that was to come, seemed to settle around them like a heavy blanket. Malcolm watched as Amara's breathing evened out, her small face relaxing into sleep. His hand remained steady on her shoulder, a quiet promise of protection and justice. Tuesday morning arrived with a heavy fog that clung to Harbor Heights like a protective blanket. Evelyn Park adjusted her glasses as she walked carefully up Lila's front steps, 3 worn leather notebooks tucked under her arm. Her sensible shoes made soft sounds against the wooden porch, each step measured and deliberate. Lila opened the door before Evelyn could knock. Miss Park, what brings you by so early? I heard what happened with little Amara, Evelyn said, her voice carrying the gentle authority of her 30 years in the classroom. And I have something you need to see. Inside, Amara sat at the kitchen table, picking at her breakfast cereal. Her usual spark seemed dimmed, but she brightened at the sight of her former kindergarten teacher. Miss Park. Hello, dear. Evelyn settled into a chair, placing her notebooks on the table. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and dog-eared. I've kept these since I started teaching in this neighborhood. Every incident, every complaint, every time I saw our children treated unfairly. Lila poured coffee for them both, her hands trembling slightly. You mean there's more? Other families? Many more. Evelyn opened the oldest notebook, her neat handwriting filling every line. June 1992. Officers warned Marcus Thompson's mother they'd cite her for disturbing the peace because Marcus was playing basketball after 7 p.m. September 1995. The Williams twins were forced to empty their backpacks on the sidewalk while walking home from school. Amara leaned forward, her spoon forgotten. They did mean things to other kids, too? Yes, sweetheart. Evelyn's voice softened. But you were braver than most. You spoke up. Across town at the precinct, Sergeant Doyle was busy spreading his own version of events. He leaned against the break room counter, speaking just loud enough for the cluster of officers filling their coffee cups. "Heard the grandmother's been causing trouble for years," he said casually. "Always stirring things up, teaching kids to disrespect authority. Probably coached the little girl what to say." Officer Reynolds, a rookie, frowned. "The girl's only 6, Sarge." "Kids that age are impressionable," Doyle countered smoothly. "Say what the adults want them to say. Shame, really, using children like that." The rumor spread through the neighborhood like poison ivy, creeping and persistent. At the local grocery store, Mrs. Henderson whispered to Mrs. Lee over the produce section, "I always thought Lila was such a nice woman, but to put her granddaughter up to causing trouble like that, and over a little water." Mrs. Lee clicked her tongue. "In my day, we respected the police." Back at Lila's house, Evelyn continued sharing her documented history. October 2001, Officer Kincaid, newly assigned to our beat, made 3 children dump out their Halloween candy, claiming he was checking for drugs. She adjusted her glasses. He's been doing this for years. Lila's coffee had gone cold, untouched. Why didn't anyone stop them? "Fear," Evelyn said simply. "Fear of retaliation, of making things worse. But I kept writing it all down, waiting for the right moment." She patted Amara's hand. "Your granddaughter gave us that moment." The day stretched on, heavy with shared stories and painful memories. As evening approached, Evelyn gathered her notebooks, promising to make copies for Malcolm's investigation team. At home that night, Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair, transcribing her handwritten notes into clearer type. Her cat, Mr. Whiskers, dozed nearby as her fingers moved steadily over the keyboard. The phone's sharp ring startled them both. Mr. Whiskers leaped down, and Evelyn reached for the receiver. "Hello?" "Miss Park." The voice was male, deliberately rough. "Those notebooks of yours? Better keep them to yourself. Retired teachers should enjoy their golden years, not go making trouble." Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone, but her voice remained steady. "Is that meant to frighten me?" "Just friendly advice. Things can happen to people who don't mind their own business. Cars break down in bad neighborhoods. Houses get broken into." "I see." Evelyn's gaze fell on her newest notebook, open to entries about Amara's incident. "And does threatening a 72-year-old woman make you feel powerful?" The voice turned harder. "Last warning, old lady. Stay out of it." Evelyn set the phone down with a firm click, her hands steady despite the threat. Mr. Whiskers jumped back into her lap, purring as she stroked his fur. On her desk, decades of careful observations waited to tell their truth. She'd spent her life teaching children to stand up for what was right. She wouldn't fail them now. She picked up her pen and opened to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote the date, then, received threatening phone call at 9:17 p.m. Male voice, likely disguised. Threatened personal harm if notebooks were shared. Her handwriting was as neat and clear as ever. The kitchen timer chimed, reminding her of her evening tea. Evelyn stood, straightening her cardigan. She'd faced down angry parents, budget-cutting administrators, and 30 years of bathroom pass excuses. A shadowy voice on the phone didn't stand a chance. Wednesday's afternoon sun beat down on the bus stop bench where Grandma Lila sat waiting. She fanned herself with a folded newspaper, watching cars drift past, on their way to somewhere else. The metal bench had grown hot in the sun, but she didn't mind. After 40 years working for the post office, she'd learned to find comfort in discomfort. A shadow fell across her feet. She looked up to see a young man in a police cadet's uniform, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His name tag read, Ruiz. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked slightly. Mrs. Dorsey? That's right. Lila studied him carefully. He couldn't have been much older than her youngest grandson. Cadet Jalen Ruiz glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. Mind if I sit? She patted the bench beside her. Plenty of room. He sat stiffly, hands clasped between his knees. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and Lila couldn't tell if it was from the heat or nerves. I was there on Saturday. At the park. I saw what happened to your granddaughter. Lila's fan stilled. Were you one of the officers who— No, Jalen said quickly. I was just observing. Part of my training. But— He swallowed hard. There's something you should know. A bus rumbled past, its brakes squealing. Jalen waited until the noise faded before continuing. They call them presence metrics. It's not official policy. You won't find it written down anywhere. But every officer assigned to neighborhoods like yours gets pressure to maintain what they call active presence. Active presence? Lila's voice was soft but firm. It means— Jalen's shoulders hunched. We're supposed to make sure people see us, feel us. Write up kids for little things, playing in sprinklers, hanging around too long, being too loud. Especially in certain neighborhoods. You mean black neighborhoods? He nodded miserably. They say it's about preventing bigger problems, teaching respect for authority early. But really, his voice dropped. It's about making sure people know who's in charge. A mother walked past, pushing a stroller. Jalen fell silent until she was out of earshot. Officers who don't write enough citations get bad shifts, worse assignments. The ones who are proactive, like Kincaid and Mays, they get praised, promoted. Lila's newspaper was crushed in her grip now. And how many children have they humiliated? How many families have they terrorized? Too many. Jalen's badge caught the sunlight. I joined to help people, to make things better. But this— He shook his head. What they did to your granddaughter, dumping that water on her. I can't stop seeing her face. But if I testify? You're afraid, Lila said, not unkindly. They'll destroy my career before it starts. Maybe worse. His laugh was hollow. I still have student loans to pay. Lila thought of Amara, standing proud even as water dripped from her braids, of Evelyn Park, refusing to be silenced. She turned to face the young cadet fully. Let me tell you something about fear, child. Her voice carried the weight of years. I was there when they turned fire hoses on children in Birmingham, saw dogs set loose on peaceful protesters, watched my father lose his job for trying to register voters. Jalen met her eyes for the first time. Fear is a tool they use to keep us quiet, she continued, to make us think twice about standing up, speaking out. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the truth costs you, but silence costs more. A warm breeze rustled through nearby trees. In the distance, children's laughter drifted from a backyard. Those metrics you mentioned? Lila smoothed her crumpled newspaper. They're hurting real children, real families. Every citation, every humiliation. It teaches our babies to be afraid in their own neighborhoods, to see themselves through cruel eyes. Jalen's hands were trembling slightly. I know. And now you have a choice. Lila's tone was gentle but unflinching. You can keep quiet, keep your head down, maybe rise up through their ranks. But every time you see another child harassed, another family intimidated, you'll know you had a chance to stop it. Another bus approached. Lila stood, gathering her purse. Or you can speak up. Yes, it might cost you. Truth often does. But you'll be able to look in the mirror and see someone who chose right over easy. Jalen remained seated, conflict etched across his young face. I need to think. Of course you do. Lila adjusted her hat. But remember this, that badge you wear? It's supposed to mean protection, not persecution. Right now, You're protecting the wrong people." The cadet stood slowly, his uniform suddenly seeming too large for his frame. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps uneven on the sun-baked sidewalk. Leela watched him go, noting how his shoulders curved inward, bearing the weight of conscience. The truth she'd spoken hung in the humid air behind him, invisible but heavy as chainmail. Each step seemed to fight against it, but the words had found their mark. Sometimes, Lila knew, the most powerful weapon against injustice was simply naming it aloud. Her bus arrived with a hiss of brakes. As she climbed aboard, she said a silent prayer for the young cadet's courage. The doors closed behind her with a decisive snap. Thursday morning arrived with a blanket of gray clouds hanging low over Harbor Heights. The special counsel's office hummed with activity as federal agents sorted through boxes of documents. The subpoenas had landed like stones in a still pond, sending ripples through the police department's carefully maintained facade. Deputy Sarah Chen spread maintenance logs across her desk, cross-referencing dates and locations. "Look at this," she called to her colleague. "Every maintenance bucket at Heritage Park gets refilled daily, even in winter. But the logs show 0 legitimate uses." Across town, Evelyn Park sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by decades of careful observations. Her neat handwriting filled notebook after notebook. Dates, times, incidents stretching back through years of watching from her second-floor window overlooking the park. "I started keeping track after they harassed my grandson in '98, she explained to the federal investigator seated across from her. Her fingers traced along a page of cramped writing. They'd target children playing, especially on hot days. Always the same pattern. Confiscate toys, write citations, make examples of anyone who questioned them. The investigator nodded, carefully placing each notebook into an evidence bag. "And you documented everything?" "Teachers notice patterns," Evelyn said simply. "After 40 years in the classroom, you learn to keep good records." At City Hall, Councilwoman Meera Patel stood at her office window, watching union representatives gather on the steps below. Their signs demanded, "Support our officers," and "No political witch hunts." Her phone buzzed again. Another message from union boss Randall. "Last chance to shut this down." She deleted it without responding. On her desk lay a thick folder of constituent complaints spanning years. Parents describing children traumatized by aggressive policing, families afraid to use public spaces, elderly residents harassed for sitting on their own porches. She'd filed them all away, telling herself there wasn't enough evidence to act. Now there was no more hiding. Her assistant knocked softly. "The hearing room is ready, Councilwoman, and the special counsel's office just delivered these." She set down a stack of documents marked with yellow tabs. Meera began reading. Her hands tightened on the pages as she discovered internal messages joking about baptisms and attitude adjustments. Officers congratulating each other for teaching lessons to uppity residents. Maintenance orders for water buckets specifically placed near play areas. "Schedule the public hearing for next Tuesday," she told her assistant. "And call security. We'll need extra officers, not from the local precinct." Across town at the FBI building, Malcolm Dorsey sat in his temporary office, separated from the main investigation to maintain objectivity. He reviewed copies of the growing evidence in silence, his face betraying no emotion as he read account after account of children humiliated, families intimidated, a community systematically taught to fear those meant to protect them. A knock at his door revealed Agent Chen. "Sir, you should see this." She handed him a printout of chat logs. Officers Kincaid and Mays had a regular competition going. They called it Attitude Adjustment Tuesdays. Malcolm read without speaking, his only reaction a slight tightening around his eyes. Finally, he set the papers down. "Make sure the special counsel has copies. And Agent Chen? Thank you. She nodded, understanding his position, forced to watch from the sidelines while others fought for justice for his daughter. As she left, he turned to the window, remembering Amara's face that day, wet hair plastered to her cheeks, but chin held high. Evening settled over Harbor Heights. In Malcolm's home office, Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by colored pencils and paper. Malcolm worked quietly at his desk, reading reports that would never mention his daughter's name. "Daddy?" Amara's voice was soft but clear. "Yes, baby?" "I made something." She stood and brought him a carefully drawn picture. In wobbly but determined lines, she'd sketched a police badge. Across its center, in large purple letters, she'd written, "Sorry." Malcolm set down his papers and pulled her onto his lap. "That's very good, Amara. Can you tell me about it?" "It's what their badges should say," she explained, tracing the letters with her finger. "Because when you do something wrong, you're supposed to say sorry and mean it." Malcolm held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "That's right, baby. That's exactly right. Will they have to say sorry?" Her voice was small but steady. "We're working on it," Malcolm answered carefully. "A lot of good people are working very hard to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to other children." Amara nodded, considering this. "Good," she said finally, "because it wasn't fair, and it wasn't right." Malcolm looked at the drawing again, a child's simple wisdom cutting straight to the heart of justice. In all the files, all the evidence being gathered, nothing spoke more clearly than this crayon badge with its purple demand for accountability. "Can we put it on the fridge?" Amara asked. "Of course we can." Malcolm stood, still holding her. Together they walked to the kitchen, where he helped her choose a magnet to display her work. The sorry badge hung there in the growing dusk, a small but powerful reminder of why the fight for justice mattered, not for vengeance or power, but for every child's right to play without fear, to speak without punishment, to expect better from those who wore real badges. Friday morning brought unusual activity to the county courthouse. Police cruisers lined the street, their lights reflecting off the building's glass facade. Inside, the marble halls echoed with hurried footsteps as reporters gathered in clusters, their voices low but excited. In a private waiting room, Grandma Lila sat straight-backed on a wooden bench, her hand clasped tightly around Amara's smaller one. The little girl wore a crisp yellow dress, her hair carefully braided with matching ribbons. "Remember what we talked about," Lila said softly. "No matter what happens today, you did nothing wrong." Amara nodded, swinging her feet that didn't quite reach the floor. "I know, Grandma. Daddy says the truth is stronger than lies." Down the hall, the grand jury had been meeting since early morning. 23 citizens sat listening to evidence, viewing body camera footage, reading through text messages and maintenance logs. They heard testimony about presence metrics and systematic harassment. They saw photos of a small girl in a soaked dress, standing proud despite her humiliation. Outside the jury room, Special Counsel Patricia Martinez organized her files, her face carefully neutral. She'd presented a solid case, not just about one incident, but about years of abusive practices disguised as community policing. The evidence was clear, but grand juries could be unpredictable. In another part of the building, Officers Kincaid and Mays waited with their union representatives. Kincaid's leg bounced nervously while Mays picked at her fingernails, her usual smirk replaced by worry lines around her mouth. "They can't prove intent," their union lawyer assured them. "It was a simple disciplinary action that got blown out of proportion." But Kincaid wasn't so sure. He'd seen the looks on the grand jurors' faces when they watched the footage, heard their intake of breath at Amara's age, noticed how they studied the text messages about attitude adjustments and baptisms. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed with speculation. Clerks and attorneys huddled over coffee, discussing odds. "The FBI doesn't bring cases they can't win," one veteran prosecutor remarked. "And did you see those chat logs?" By early afternoon, word spread that the grand jury had reached their decision. The hallways filled with tension as people waited for the announcements. Malcolm Dorsey sat in his temporary office across town, deliberately distant from the proceedings. He'd recused himself completely, trusting in the system he'd served for decades. His phone sat silent on his desk. He'd hear the news when everyone else did. At 2:15 p.m., the court clerk emerged with sealed envelopes. Reporters straightened their jackets and checked their microphones. Photographers adjusted their lenses. The indictments came down like hammer blows. Officer Brent Kincaid. 2 counts of child endangerment. 1 count of civil rights violations under color of law. 1 count of conspiracy to violate civil rights. Officer Laura Mays. 2 counts of child endangerment. 1 count of civil rights violations under color of law. 1 count of conspiracy to violate civil rights. Additional sealed indictments were issued, with names to be revealed pending arrests. The clerk's voice rang clear through the packed courthouse. The defendants are to surrender their badges and weapons immediately. They will be suspended without pay pending trial. In the waiting room, Lila's hands trembled as she received the news. Beside her, Amara sat very still, her small face serious as she listened to the adults talking. "What does it mean, Grandma?" she whispered. "It means," Lila explained carefully, "that those officers did something wrong, and now they have to answer for it, just like anyone else who breaks the law." Outside the courthouse, news crews set up their equipment. The story was already spreading through Harbor Heights. 2 officers indicted, suspended without pay, more arrests possibly coming. In the park where it all started, parents gathered, sharing the news in hushed, hopeful tones. Evelyn Park stood in her usual spot by her second-floor window, watching children play freely in the afternoon sun. No patrol cars circled today. No officers stood menacingly by the water fountains. She opened a fresh notebook and wrote the date, adding simply, "Justice begins." At the police precinct, Chief Warren Beck locked himself in his office, ignoring calls from the mayor's office. Doyle quietly began shredding documents until a federal agent appeared in his doorway, warrant in hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Sergeant," the agent said mildly. "Destroying evidence is a federal offense." Union boss Randall stormed through the station, shouting about appeals and media bias, but fewer officers seemed to be listening. Rookie Jalen Ruiz watched from his desk, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As the afternoon wore on, neighbors began gathering on Lila's street. They brought covered dishes and lemonade, setting up an impromptu celebration on front porches and in tiny yards. Children played freely with garden hoses, their laughter ringing out without fear. The media wanted interviews, but Lila kept Amara away from the cameras. They stood together on the courthouse steps, watching the busy scene below. News vans lined the street, reporters talked into microphones, and police union representatives made angry statements to anyone who would listen. But none of that mattered to the grandmother and granddaughter standing quietly together. Lila wrapped her arms around Amara's shoulders, drawing her close. The little girl leaned back against her grandmother's steady presence, both of them absorbing the weight of the moment. "Maybe justice is real after all," Lila whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Monday morning arrived with a bitter chill despite the summer sun. At the Harbor Heights Police Department, IT technician Gary Morton stared at his screen in apparent distress, sweat beading on his forehead. "Total system failure," he announced to Chief Beck. "The evidence servers crashed sometime over the weekend. Backups are corrupted too." Beck nodded slowly, his face carefully arranged into a concerned frown. "How unfortunate." Document everything for the insurance claim. By noon, word spread through the courthouse that years of body cam footage, internal communications, and digital evidence had vanished. The chat logs showing officers joking about teaching respect to neighborhood kids, gone. The maintenance records proving the water bucket incident was planned, erased. Special Counsel Martinez paced her office, phone pressed to her ear. "This is more than coincidence," she argued. "We need emergency preservation orders for any remaining—" "Too late," her tech specialist interrupted. "They're claiming catastrophic hardware failure. Everything's wiped clean." Across town, Grandma Lila sat at her kitchen table, hands trembling as she opened a new certified letter. The original citation for interfering with officers had been upgraded to multiple counts: obstruction of justice, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, resisting arrest. The potential penalties made her chest tight. But worse was the careful mention, buried in legal language, about concerns regarding the child's home environment and possible CPS involvement pending investigation. "They're trying to scare us," Lila whispered to herself, though her voice shook. She glanced out the window where Amara played with her chalk, drawing elaborate pictures of butterflies on the sidewalk. The thought of anyone threatening to take her granddaughter made her blood run cold. At FBI headquarters, Malcolm Dorsey's morning meeting was interrupted by internal affairs. They carried a memo, apparently leaked from his private files, suggesting he'd pressured agents to target specific officers and fabricate evidence. "This is a forgery," Malcolm stated calmly, studying the document. The signature looked real, but he recognized subtle differences. Years of forensic training hadn't gone to waste. "Nevertheless," the IA officer replied, "pending investigation, you're placed on administrative leave. Please surrender your credentials." Malcolm handed over his badge and gun without argument. He'd expected something like this. Corruption never went quietly. Still, the weight of the loss settled heavy in his stomach as he packed up his office. Back at the precinct, Officers Kincaid and Mays returned to duty, restricted to desk work but welcomed as heroes. Other officers stopped by their desks with coffee and donuts, sharing knowing smirks. "Hey, Mays," one called out. "Heard it's gonna be hot this week. Maybe we should organize some more baptisms over on Maple Street?" Laughter rippled through the squad room. Mays grinned, her earlier worry replaced by smug satisfaction. "Gotta keep the kids cool in this weather," she shot back. Rookie Jalen Ruiz kept his head down at his desk, stomach churning as he listened to the jokes. The chat logs he'd seen were gone now, but he couldn't forget what they'd contained. Still, fear kept him silent. By afternoon, local news stations ran stories questioning the integrity of the federal investigation. Anonymous sources hinted at overreach and political motivation. The police union released statements about witch hunts and attacks on law enforcement. Councilwoman Patel's office issued a careful statement about reviewing all available evidence before proceeding. The promised oversight hearings were quietly postponed. In her living room, Evelyn Park watched the news unfold with growing anger. Her carefully kept notebooks felt pathetically inadequate against the machinery of institutional power. But she kept writing, recording every new development with trembling fingers. Malcolm picked Amara up from school himself that afternoon. She was quieter than usual, her usual bounce subdued. They walked through the park where it had all started, now strangely empty of playing children. "The other kids say their parents won't let them play here anymore," Amara said softly. "They're scared of the police coming back." Malcolm squeezed her small hand, noting how the splash pad stood silent. No laughing children running through its spray. The maintenance bucket had been removed, but he could still picture exactly where it had stood. They stopped at an empty bench. Amara kicked her feet, not meeting her father's eyes. The weight of recent events seemed to press down on her small shoulders. "Daddy," she finally whispered, her voice small and uncertain. "Was I wrong to talk back that day?" Malcolm knelt in front of her, gently taking both her hands in his. He could see the worry in her eyes, the fear that her actions had somehow caused all this trouble. The sight made his heart ache. "No, Amara," he said firmly. "You were right. Standing up to bullies is always right, even when they wear badges." Amara's lower lip trembled. "But now you can't go to work, and Grandma's in trouble, and the mean officers are back." Malcolm squeezed her hands. "You were right," he repeated, "and we'll prove it." He knew there had to be copies of those records somewhere. Systems had redundancies. People made mistakes. Truth had a way of surfacing if you knew where to look. Tuesday morning dawned gray and humid. Evelyn Park's arthritis was acting up, but she ignored the ache in her fingers as she gathered her collection of notebooks. Decades of careful observations, written in her neat teacher's handwriting, filled box after box. She'd started keeping records back in 1982, when her fourth-grade student Tommy Williams came to class with a bruised face after a talk with officers about playing basketball too late. Every incident since then, dates, times, badge numbers, witness accounts, lay documented in her precise hand. The taxi dropped her at Lila's house just after 9. Amara answered the door, her usual sparkle somewhat dimmed but still present. "Miss Evelyn!" she exclaimed, giving the older woman a careful hug. "Are those all books?" "Records, sweet girl," Evelyn replied, letting Lila help her carry the boxes to the dining room table. Sometimes the best weapon against lies is just writing down the truth, day after day. They began sorting through the notebooks chronologically. Lila's hands trembled as she read entries from years past. April 15, 1989. Officers Maxwell and Peters confiscated children's bikes for suspicious activity. Riding on sidewalk. Returned 3 days later, damaged. July 3, 1995. Officer Drake poured out Williams' family's cooler at Park BBQ, claimed alcohol suspected. Only contained fruit punch. Verified personally. September 12, 2008. New presence metrics policy announced at community meeting. Captain Stone stated goal to maintain order through visible enforcement. Page after page documented the steady drip of harassment, humiliation, and intimidation. Children's games interrupted, parents searched without cause, belongings confiscated or damaged, all carefully noted with times, dates, and officer names. "Lord have mercy," Lila whispered, wiping her eyes. "We weren't crazy. It wasn't just in our heads." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "It was real. Every bit of it. And now we have proof." They were still reviewing the notebooks when Lila's phone rang. She answered cautiously, then straightened up. "Jalen," she said, "are you all right?" The young cadet's voice shook even through the speaker. "Mrs. Lila, I can't sleep, can't eat. What they did to that little girl, what they're still doing, it's eating me up inside." "I know, son," Lila said gently. "Sometimes doing right is harder than staying quiet." "There's more," Jalen continued. "The server crash? It wasn't complete. We use an off-site vendor for backup storage. Department policy. I checked this morning. Everything's still there. Chat logs, body cam footage, maintenance records. But they'll notice if I access it." Lila's hands were steady now as she picked up her other phone and dialed Malcolm. When she explained, his response was immediate. "Put him on speaker." Malcolm's voice filled the room, calm and authoritative despite his suspension. "Cadet Ruiz, this is Malcolm Dorsey. I want you to listen carefully. What you're describing is evidence of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Are you prepared to come forward officially?" Jalen's breath hitched. Only if I'm protected. They'll destroy me otherwise. You don't know what they're capable of." "Actually, we do," Malcolm replied, glancing at Evelyn's notebooks. "But I give you my word. You'll have full federal protection." We'll move you to a safe location today if necessary." "Then yes," Jalen said. "I'll testify. About everything, the metric system, the targeting of specific neighborhoods, the water bucket setup, all of it." "This is the crack we needed," Malcolm murmured, almost to himself. Then, more clearly, "Stay where you are, Cadet. I'm calling Special Counsel Martinez now." Within an hour, federal agents arrived to escort Jalen to a secure location. 2 more came for Evelyn's notebooks, cataloging each one as evidence with meticulous care. 39 years of notes, Evelyn told the agents. Every incident, every pattern, every coincidence that wasn't coincidental at all. "I may be retired, but I never stopped teaching. Some lessons just take longer to sink in." Special Counsel Martinez arrived personally to review the evidence. She spent hours with Evelyn, going through the notebooks page by page. Her expression grew grimmer with each documented incident. "This is extraordinary," Martinez said finally. "Combined with the backup server data Cadet Ruiz identified, we have a comprehensive picture of systemic abuse spanning decades. The pattern is undeniable." Evelyn straightened her shoulders, teacher mode fully engaged. "Patterns matter, Counsel. They tell the real story. One incident can be explained away. Hundreds, documented over decades? That's not coincidence, that's policy." Martinez nodded, carefully closing the notebook she'd been reading. "We'll need you to authenticate these records formally. Are you prepared to testify?" "I've been preparing for 40 years, Evelyn replied. "Some lessons must be taught over and over until they stick. Seems it's time for the final exam." As federal agents carefully packed up the last box of notebooks, Amara tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. "Miss Evelyn, did you really write down everything bad that happened?" "Everything I saw or heard about, dear heart. Someone had to remember." Amara considered this seriously. "Like a history book?" "Exactly like that. Because those who forget history—" Evelyn paused, watching Martinez seal the evidence bags. "Are doomed to repeat it," Lila finished quietly. "But not this time. Not anymore." Wednesday morning at the special counsel's office buzzed with nervous energy. Jalen Ruiz clutched a small USB drive in his sweaty palm, escorted by 2 federal agents. His police uniform felt strange now, like a costume he'd borrowed rather than earned. Special Counsel Martinez met him in a secured conference room, her face professionally neutral. "Cadet Ruiz, thank you for coming forward." "I should have done it sooner," Jalen said, placing the drive carefully on the table. "Everything's here. The real records, not the fake crash story they're pushing." Martinez nodded to a tech specialist who began downloading and verifying the files. The room fell silent except for keyboard clicks and the soft whir of equipment. "Tell me what we're looking at," Martinez said. Jalen leaned forward. "The department uses CloudSecure for off-site backup. Everything gets mirrored automatically. Body cam footage, patrol logs, internal chat archives, maintenance requests. They can't delete it without the vendor's involvement." The text screen filled with folders. "It's all here," she confirmed. "Chronological backups going back 3 years." Martinez opened the chat logs first. The screen filled with casual conversations between officers, unguarded and unfiltered. Jalen pointed to specific exchanges. Kincaid B. Another successful baptism on Maple Street today. Maisel. Little Princess needed cooling off. Doyle's. Good work maintaining presence. Keep those metrics up. They were laughing about it, Jalen said, his voice tight. Sharing photos of Amara, soaked and crying. Martinez's expression hardened as she scrolled through more messages. The pattern was clear. Officers regularly discussed teaching lessons to disrespectful residents, particularly in minority neighborhoods. "Show me the metrics directive," she ordered. The tech pulled up a PDF signed by Chief Beck himself. The document detailed community presence requirements, with specific quotas for different neighborhoods. Maple Street's zone called for minimum 3 citations per shift and active deterrence of unauthorized gatherings. They coded it carefully, Jalen explained, but everyone knew what it meant. More stops, more citations, more presence in certain areas. Break up kids playing. Check anyone who looked suspicious. Martinez highlighted a key phrase. Officers will maintain order through visible enforcement actions targeting quality-of-life violations. Quality of life, she repeated. Interesting choice of words. The body cam footage came next. Crystal-clear video showed the incident from both Kincaid's and Mays's perspectives. Amara's voice rang out clear and innocent. "He's not bad. He's just playing. You're the bullies." Then came the water, the laughter, Kincaid's sneering face as he told her to learn respect. The footage continued, showing them joking afterward while filling out falsified reports. "They never thought anyone would see this," Jalen said. "The department protects its own. Until now." Martinez's team worked methodically through the files, building a timeline. The evidence was overwhelming. Chief Beck's signature appeared on policy after policy, enabling harassment under the guise of community policing. Chat logs showed Sergeant Doyle coordinating the cover-up, ordering the fake server crash, and coaching officers on their stories. "What made you decide to come forward?" Martinez asked Jalen during a brief break. He was quiet for a moment. "My little sister is Amara's age. I kept thinking, what if it was her? What if someone dumped water on her head and laughed? What if I was part of a system that hurt little kids just to feel powerful?" By afternoon, Martinez's team had compiled a devastating collection of evidence. Video footage, chat logs, signed directives, falsified reports, all documenting not just the incident with Amara, but years of systematic harassment targeting minority neighborhoods. "Councilwoman Patel's hearing is tomorrow," Martinez said, reviewing their findings. "This changes everything." Her assistant entered with more files. "The vendor just confirmed. No deletion requests were ever submitted. This is the complete record." Martinez nodded grimly. "Prepare it all for presentation. Every chat log, every video, every signature. The department wanted to bury this. Instead, they're going to watch it play out on public record." She turned to Jalen. "Are you ready to testify?" "Yes, ma'am," he said firmly. "I took an oath to protect and serve. This is what that really means." The team worked late into the night, organizing evidence for the hearing. They created clear timelines showing the progression from Beck's metrics policies to daily harassment to the incident with Amara. Chat logs revealed the casual cruelty behind the badge. Video footage captured the human cost. "Send copies to secure storage," Martinez ordered. "They can't crash these servers." Jalen watched the preparations from a corner, his shoulders finally relaxing. "Will this really change anything?" "Change starts with truth," Martinez replied, sorting documents into presentation order. "They can't hide from their own words, their own actions, their own signatures." As night fell, the evidence stood ready, an irrefutable record of abuse of power, systemic harassment, and attempted cover-up. Martinez reviewed her opening statement one final time. The truth about Harbor Heights Police Department would finally come to light, not through angry accusations or personal vendettas, but through their own documented words and actions. The system had protected itself for decades. Tomorrow, that protection would shatter under the weight of undeniable evidence. Jalen looked at his badge one last time before turning it in. "I thought being a good cop meant staying quiet, being loyal. I was wrong." "No," Martinez corrected him. "Being a good cop means standing up for what's right. That's exactly what you did." The city council chamber buzzed with tension Tuesday morning. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. News cameras lined the back, their red lights blinking steadily. Councilwoman Patel sat straight-backed at the center of the raised platform, her face a careful mask of neutrality. To her left and right, other council members shuffled papers nervously. The clock struck 9. "This oversight hearing will come to order," Patel announced, bringing down her gavel. The sharp crack silenced the murmuring crowd. Chief Beck sat at the respondents' table, looking polished in his dress uniform. Beside him, Sergeant Doyle tugged at his collar. Their lawyers whispered urgently between them. Special Counsel Martinez rose from the prosecutor's table. "Councilwoman, members of the board, we're here today to present evidence of systematic civil rights violations by the Harbor Heights Police Department." She nodded to her assistant, who dimmed the lights. A projector hummed to life, displaying the first chat log transcript. The timestamp showed the day of the incident with Amara. "These are unaltered communications between Officers Kincaid and Mays, captured through the department's secure messaging system," Martinez explained. The messages appeared line by line. Kincaid B. "Little princess got what she deserved." Maisel. "Bet she won't mouth off again." Kincaid B. "One baptism down. Plenty more to go." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Beck's jaw tightened visibly. Martinez continued methodically. This was not an isolated incident. More screenshots appeared, dozens of similar exchanges spanning months. Officers casually discussing teaching lessons to residents in minority neighborhoods, sharing photos of confrontations, joking about attitude adjustments. Now, let's examine the policy behind these actions. Martinez displayed the department's patrol directives. Note the signature at the bottom of each page. Chief Beck's name appeared clearly on document after document. Each one detailed presence metrics for different neighborhoods, with notably higher requirements for areas like Maple Street. "Sergeant Doyle," Martinez turned to face him directly. "Please explain these metrics to the council." Doyle shifted uncomfortably. "Standard community policing guidelines. Nothing unusual." "Really?" Martinez highlighted specific passages. "Minimum citation requirements? Active deterrence of unauthorized gatherings? Please explain how these apply equally across all neighborhoods." "We respond to areas of highest need," Doyle stammered. "And how is that need determined?" Martinez pressed. "Complaint volumes, incident reports." His voice trailed off as Martinez displayed a map showing enforcement patterns clearly concentrated in minority areas. The evidence mounted relentlessly. Maintenance logs showed the water bucket had been deliberately placed for community presence activities. Patrol rosters revealed systematic targeting of specific blocks during times children typically played outside. Then came the body cam footage. The chamber fell silent as they watched Amara stand up to the officers, followed by the cruel dumping of water and mocking laughter. Several council members visibly flinched. "And here," Martinez continued, "is how the department responded to complaints." She displayed internal emails showing Doyle coordinating the cover-up, ordering the server crash, and coaching officers on their stories. From the gallery, Grandma Lila watched with tears in her eyes. Beside her, Malcolm sat perfectly still, his face unreadable. Amara had stayed home, but her presence filled the room. In the footage, in the cruel jokes, in the system that had tried to break her spirit. "Finally," Martinez said, "we have testimony from Officer Jalen Ruiz." Jalen approached the podium, still in uniform, but without his badge. His voice shook slightly but grew stronger as he described the pressure to maintain presence, the unwritten rules about targeting certain neighborhoods, the culture of silence and retaliation. "We were told it was about respect," he said. "But it wasn't. It was about power, about humiliation, about teaching people, even little kids, to be afraid of us." Chief Beck's lawyer tried to object, but Patel waved him down. The evidence was too clear, too overwhelming. Martinez projected one final image, a photo of Amara standing drenched in her sundress, chin raised defiantly despite her tears. This is what community policing looked like in Harbor Heights. Not protection, not service. Deliberate harassment of a 6-year-old girl for daring to speak up. The chamber erupted in angry murmurs. Beck's face had gone from confident to ashen. Doyle stared at the floor. "Councilwoman," Martinez concluded, "we've presented clear evidence of civil rights violations, systematic harassment, and attempted cover-up, all authorized at the highest levels of the department. We ask for immediate action." Patel surveyed the room slowly. The evidence screens still glowed with damning proof. Chat logs, signed orders, cruel jokes about baptisms. The truth lay bare and ugly under the council chamber lights. She lifted her gavel, her voice ringing with controlled fury. "This will not be buried!" The crack of wood on wood was drowned out by the crowd's reaction. People leapt to their feet, some cheering, others calling for resignations. Reporters rushed for the doors, already dialing phones. Through it all, Malcolm and Lila sat quietly. The system had tried to silence a little girl's voice. Instead, her courage had exposed decades of abuse. Now, finally, change would come. Not through revenge or violence, but through the patient power of truth. Friday dawned cold and gray over Harbor Heights. At exactly 6 a.m., black SUVs rolled silently through the empty streets, converging on multiple locations across the city. FBI tactical teams moved with practiced precision, their movements coordinated down to the second. At the precinct, Officer Laura Mays was just starting her early desk shift when the first agents entered. She reached for her radio, but froze at the sight of raised badges and warrant papers. Down the hall, Kincaid emerged from the break room, coffee cup shattering on the floor as agents surrounded him. "Federal agents! Hands where we can see them!" The commands echoed through the building's corridors. Sergeant Doyle heard the commotion from his office. He lunged for his computer's delete key, but the door burst open before he could reach it. 2 agents in tactical gear secured him, while a third immediately moved to preserve the computer evidence. "James Doyle, you're under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, under color of law, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice." The agent's voice was clinical, professional. Across town, Chief Beck was still in his bathrobe when agents breached his front door. His wife screamed from the kitchen as they swept through the house, finding him trying to flush his phone down the toilet. They recovered it, still dripping. "Warren Beck, federal agents, we have a warrant for your arrest." They cuffed him as news vans began arriving outside, their lights cutting through the morning gloom. At the police union headquarters, Gus Randall had just arrived to check his messages when the raid team hit. He tried barricading himself in his office, but they breached it in seconds. Files scattered across the floor as they took him down, his protests lost in the chaos. Local news crews, tipped off by the multiple raids, broadcast live footage across the city. Helicopter shots showed the coordinated operation unfolding simultaneously at a dozen locations. Computer contractors, records offices, even the company that maintained the precinct's servers, all were being searched under federal warrants. In the FBI command center, Special Agent Thompson coordinated the operation. "Target 3 secured," crackled one radio. "Evidence team entering at Site 7, reported another. Years of building cases had taught them to be thorough, methodical, leaving no loose ends. Citizens gathered on sidewalks, watching as those who had terrorized their neighborhoods were led away in handcuffs. Some cheered, others just stood silently, witnessing justice they'd stopped believing would ever come. At the federal courthouse, prosecutors were already preparing the arraignment paperwork. The charges were extensive: conspiracy to violate civil rights, witness tampering, evidence destruction, making false statements, abuse of authority. Each count carefully documented, each charge backed by mountains of evidence. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps as the first transport vehicles arrived. Kincaid and Mays were led in first, their faces tight with anger and disbelief. Doyle followed, head down, already looking defeated. Beck tried to maintain his dignity, but stumbled on the steps, requiring assistance from the agents flanking him. Inside his home, Malcolm Dorsey sat in his living room, still technically on administrative leave, watching the events unfold on multiple news channels. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from former colleagues, but he let them go to voicemail. This moment wasn't about him. The morning news anchors struggled to keep up with developments. "We're getting reports now of a massive federal operation targeting the Harbor Heights Police Department," one reported. Sources say the arrests stem from civil rights violations and an attempted cover-up involving the harassment of a minor. Aerial footage showed agents carrying boxes of documents from the union office. Computer forensics teams wheeled servers out of the precinct. Each piece of evidence represented another nail in the coffin of systemic abuse. At Grandma Lila's house, neighbors gathered to watch the coverage together. Someone brought coffee and donuts. They sat in reverent silence as justice rolled through their city like a cleansing storm. The consent decree was announced mid-morning. The department would be placed under independent oversight for a minimum of 5 years. Neighborhood patrol quotas were explicitly banned. Body camera footage would be automatically backed up to multiple secure locations. Community review boards would have real power to investigate complaints. "This is not just about punishing past wrongs," the U.S. Attorney declared from the courthouse steps. "This is about fundamental reform, about ensuring that law enforcement serves all communities equally and with respect." In interview after interview, legal experts explained the significance. This wasn't just about one incident with one child. It was about decades of systematic harassment finally being exposed and addressed. The arrests were just the beginning. Malcolm watched it all unfold on his television screen, his body gradually releasing tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying. He thought about Amara, about her courage in standing up to bullies, about how her simple act of defiance had cracked open decades of abuse. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text from the Attorney General. "Justice served. Come back to work Monday." But Malcolm didn't respond yet. He just sat, watching as the morning's events replayed across every channel, finally allowing himself to exhale. Outside his window, the sun broke through the morning clouds, casting long shadows across Harbor Heights. In precinct holding cells and federal detention centers, the architects of oppression were learning what it felt like to be powerless. In neighborhoods across the city, people began to believe that maybe, just maybe, change was possible after all. Malcolm closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past weeks begin to lift. The system had worked, slowly but inexorably, grinding toward justice not through force or revenge, but through the patient application of law. 3 weeks after the raids, Amara sat in the federal courthouse wearing her favorite yellow dress. Her small hand gripped Grandma Lila's tightly as officers Kincaid and Mays stood before the judge in orange jumpsuits, their badges and uniforms long gone. The courtroom was packed but silent. Even the usual shuffle of papers seemed muted. Judge Harrison's voice carried clearly through the heavy air. "As part of your plea agreement, you will now directly address the child you wronged." Kincaid stepped forward first, his face drawn and pale. Gone was the swagger, the sneer, the air of untouchable authority. He turned to face Amara, his hands trembling slightly. "Miss Dorsey," he began, his voice cracking, "what I did to you was wrong. Dead wrong. I was supposed to protect you, but instead, I hurt you because my pride was wounded by a 6-year-old telling the truth." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for using my power to humiliate you. I'm sorry for teaching other officers that cruelty was okay. You were braver and more honest than I've ever been." Maze followed, her usual smirk replaced by genuine shame. "Amara, I poured that water on you because I thought it was funny to make a little girl feel small. I wanted to teach you to be afraid of police. That was evil, and I will carry that shame forever." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You showed more dignity soaking wet than I ever did in a uniform." Amara listened solemnly, her chin held high. When they finished, she whispered to her father, "Can I say something?" Malcolm nodded and helped her stand on her chair. "I forgive you," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. "But you have to promise to never be mean to kids again." The simplicity of her words made several jurors wipe their eyes. The proceedings continued. Judge Harrison formally accepted the guilty pleas and pronounced sentences: jail time, permanent loss of law enforcement credentials, mandatory community service, and ethics training. But it was Amara's forgiveness that seemed to hit the former officers hardest. Later that afternoon, at City Hall, Mayor Chen stood at a podium surrounded by community leaders. "Today, we formally dismiss all charges against Mrs. Lila Dorsey and issue a public apology for the harassment she and her granddaughter endured." He turned to face Lila directly. "We failed you, ma'am. We failed your family and our city. But your strength has helped create real change." The mayor unveiled the Harbor Heights Neighborhood Dignity Initiative, a comprehensive program of police reform, community oversight, and youth engagement. The first action: removing presence metrics and quota systems from all law enforcement policies. Councilwoman Patel, who had found her courage during the crisis, announced the installation of a bronze plaque on Maple Street. The unveiling drew a crowd of neighbors, activists, and families. Children pressed close to read the words etched in metal. "Children's right to play, speak, and be safe, established 2023 in honor of those who stood for justice." At FBI headquarters in Washington, Malcolm's return to duty was marked by new federal guidelines. "Evidence protection protocols will be standardized across all jurisdictions," he announced to the press. "Whistleblower safeguards will be strengthened. And we will maintain a zero-tolerance policy for civil rights violations by law enforcement." The changes rippled through Harbor Heights like a fresh breeze. Park supervisors welcomed families with smiles instead of suspicious glances. New officers trained under community mentors. Kids played freely, their laughter no longer seen as a threat to order. Back on Maple Street, neighbors gathered for a block party to reclaim their space. Tables overflowed with food, music filled the air, and garden hoses created rainbow arcs in the afternoon sun. Kids darted through the spray, squealing with delight. Amara stood before the new plaque, carefully sounding out each letter as water droplets sparkled around her. "Dignity," she spelled, bouncing with each letter. Her yellow dress was damp from play, but this time from joy, not cruelty. Grandma Lila watched from her porch swing, remembering the day everything changed. A tear slid down her cheek as she saw Amara leap through another spray of water, completely uninhibited. "Look, Grandma!" Amara called out, pointing to the plaque. "That's our word now." Leela smiled, her heart full. "Yes, baby," she said softly. "Your voice made them listen. Your voice made them change." Malcolm sat beside his mother-in-law, watching his daughter play. The weight of his badge felt different now. Not a burden of power, but a reminder of responsibility, of justice done right, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Evelyn Park strolled by with her notebooks, now archived in the city's Civil Rights Museum. Jalen Ruiz, who had found his courage to speak truth, played catch with neighborhood kids while wearing his new community liaison badge. Even Councilwoman Patel had stopped by, accepting a plate of Lila's famous cookies with genuine warmth. The late afternoon sun caught the bronze plaque, making the words glow like a promise. Children raced past it, their feet pattering on wet concrete, their voices rising free and unafraid into the summer air. This was what justice looked like. Not just punishment of the guilty, but restoration of joy, dignity, and trust. Through it all, Amara continued her water ballet, spelling out DIGNITY again and again. Each letter a celebration, each splash a reminder that sometimes the smallest voices spark the biggest changes. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.